The International Air Travel Association has raised its global industry loss forecast for this year and next to $157 billion. And that's despite recent progress in the development of potential COVID-19 vaccines. That's as the second wave of the coronavirus outbreak continues to hit major markets. The airline body has called on governments to replace quarantines with wider testing programs to reopen borders and salvage the airline industry. The UK has announced it'll cut its 2-week quarantine to 5 days from next month, but only if a negative COVID-19 test is provided. Meanwhile, Australia's Qantas says it'll require travellers to provide proof of an approved vaccination in order to board its flights in the future. Iata is working on launching a digital travel pass, which will contain passenger test and vaccine information, as well as travel documents to ensure safer, contactless travel.
That we cannot wait for the vaccine to reopen borders and to restart the traffic significantly. So that's the reason why we are urging government to implement a systematic testing of passengers at departure, at arrival, following the recommendations that have been issued by the International Civil Aviation Organization and by the recommendation issued by the special working group of this organization that includes health authority and health departments of various countries.
Well, joining me now from Geneva is Chris Goter. He's Assistant Director of Corporate Communications for Europe at Iata. Welcome to the program, Chris. Now, your rather grim further downgrade for the airline industry suggests that despite the recent positive news on the vaccine front, you don't expect that to really have much effect until well into 2021.
Well, that's right. Unfortunately, today we've had to announce that we expect the industry to lose $18.5 billion this year, which is an astonishing amount of money. And it's a very unfortunate situation, of course, because this means huge job losses for thousands, perhaps millions of people worldwide who work in the industry and in industries supported by aviation. This is an unprecedented catastrophe for our industry. Next year, we do not expect much of an improvement. We're still going to see passenger numbers down by half compared to the 2019 peak. So it's a very, very slow recovery that we expect for this industry. Perhaps we will turn cash positive towards the end of next year and into 2022, but we won't see passenger numbers return in any numbers until 2024. So it's a very long process to get this industry back on its feet.
So is the revival of, passenger numbers, is that directly linked to the successful rollout of a COVID-19 vaccine?
We don't see that that's necessary, because if you introduce testing, as you heard my Director General just saying in your clip, testing is a way to reopen borders. That gives governments the ability to dispense with quarantine, and it's really quarantine and border closures that is killing the demand for travel. So if we can introduce testing instead of quarantine, there's a lot of evidence that we saw during the summer and in some countries that have introduced that means that demand comes back. People want to fly, they want to do business, they want to go on holiday, they want to visit friends and family. So if we can introduce those testing procedures, we don't need to wait for a vaccine, which, to be frank, is probably still some months off.
It would seem that the UK government, at least, has listened to your calls to implement more testing in order to replace quarantine. So instead of a 14-day isolation period, travellers will be able to spend just 5 days in quarantine if on the 5th day they can produce a negative PCR test. Clearly, that's good news for the airline industry. Do you expect that to have a bit of a positive impact on passenger numbers?
Well, it's a start. But as I was mentioning before, quarantine really does put a huge dampener on demand. Even 5 days quarantine, it's better than 14 days, but 5 days is still quite poor. And it does not mean that the industry will fully recover. So ultimately, we really need to see all quarantine removed. We believe that the evidence is that testing gives governments the confidence to be able to do that. So we will be continuing to push for the UK government to get rid of quarantine completely. Prior to COVID, it was the world's third largest aviation market. It's a hugely important connector market, as we know. So it's hugely important that that the demand returns to that market. And so, yes, it's a start. It's a positive move today that we heard from the government, but we are pushing for more.
Now, we've seen countries like the US, Australia and others, I guess, devote millions, if not billions of dollars to help prop up some of its ailing airlines. But even with that, are you expecting to see in the near future the collapse of other carriers who might not have that luxury?
Well, it's true that some governments really did step forward. In fact, about $173 billion was given last year in a variety of forms to keep the aviation industry viable. Some of that was direct cash injections, others were in the form of loans and other help. So we shouldn't forget that the debt burden facing airlines going forward has dramatically increased. But yes, the support from governments was very welcome. We may need more of that. As you point out, we're still in deep trouble. Possibly the industry will get cash positive towards the end of next year if the vaccine and the testing and the borders can reopen and demand return. So that might open the possibility that the industry can stand on its feet. But I think that probably some governments will need to intervene to continue to keep some airlines going. Otherwise, we will see further bankruptcies, I'm afraid.
Okay, Chris Gota from Iata in Geneva, thank you so much again for joining us on the program.